What's that smell?
Oh, that would be me. I've been swimming in raw sewage. I love it. I love it. That's the signal. Let's go. Do it.
Welcome to this bonus episode of Trimming the Musical Fat. I'm Paul Nicholson.
And I'm Stephen Nicholson.
And together with our guests over the next 30 minutes or
Stephen
so,
Nicholson.
we'll be talking a little bit more about the subject of our previous full episode, Metallica's And Justice for All. So what will you hear? Each of us will reveal our own track listing and sequencing for the album. We'll also explain our reasoning to these. We'll talk about our experience watching Metallica in concert over the last 30 years. These include car breakdowns, the most drunken coach trip ever, and people not knowing where they live. And we talk about what we expect from Metallica as a band going forward. So I'd like to welcome back Mark Poole, Brian Borthwick, and Paul Mellon. How are you guys?
Very well, thanks, Paul. How are you?
Good, thank you.
Very good.
Good to have you here. So what we're going to do now, we're going to do the Justice for Metallica. Let's start talking about it. So, Mark, can you talk us through your own selection, your sequencing of the album and your reasoning for that?
Yeah, I've got a slightly different selection from the selection we all arrived at because I favoured a different track. So I've gone very much with a two sides format. I liked having a first side of my album with a lot of good old-fashioned heavy Metallica, and a second side which was a bit more interesting, a bit more variety. So I started with Blackened, just like the album starts, which I think is a great opener. And then a couple of my other favourites, Frayed Ends of Sanity and Harvester of Sorrow, were solid side A tracks. Finished the first side with a bang, which I just think is a brilliant 5 minutes of Metallica. And then on the second side, I put on Shortest Straw to start with, which I think is a great, great song. It's got a bit of everything. And then followed by Injustice for All, which is probably one of the more sort of Metallica sort of developing into something a bit new, a bit different from what they'd had in previous albums. For the second album on song on side B, and then I finished it with one, which I just think is a phenomenal song, and starts slow, gets fast, gets faster than you realize, and just finishes the album on a real, you can't beat with something that is just like one of the best songs ever, and finishes in such a powerful way, and it's got such a strong anti-message, and that's how I wanted it. I wanted side A, side B, fast and heavy on the first side, a bit more interesting on the second, and ending with a bang.
How many tracks was that in total that you had there, Mark?
That's a 7-track album.
7-track. And what was the time?
I think it was 49-ish.
49, so you just got in there.
It's just got in, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, and what would you, like your sequencing of the tracks and the order, what would you give the album rating out of 5 for your version of it?
I would give it, well, it still has the production of the original 4.5 out of 5 for my version.
Mm-hmm. So 4.5 out of 5.
Yeah, with heavier bass and a bit more sort of raw production, 5 out of 5.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Mark. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thanks. And we'll now go on to Paul Mellon. Do you want to explain what songs you chose and why you chose them in the order you did, Paul?
Well, basically, I chose the first 7 songs on the album because I think the order is spot on. I think it fits. Each song fits in perfectly. And I dropped the last two purely because of time. I chose the single version of one because with that added in with all the other songs, it came in at 48 minutes and 2 seconds. So unfortunately, I couldn't even fit in the full version of one. And I think that's sort of symptomatic of the album. The songs are long. Each song has sort of various parts to them, of course, with the sort of thrash metal parts that are pretty fast, and then you get the change in tempo, and it goes back up to the thrash metal tempo again. I think it's just a feature of all the songs on the album, and I think it seemed like they had so much material to fit in. They tried to squeeze in as much as possible, and I think a lot of the songs, a few of the songs could have been trimmed down a bit, especially those that were nearly sort of 10 minutes long. I think they could have been shortened. But overall, I think it's a really good album.
Yeah. And what would be, so you're going for like the first 7 songs on the album, and what would your rating be for that, Paul?
I would say 4, the same as I gave for the full album.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks for that, Paul. It's really interesting hearing people's take on it, actually. And Stephen, will we go with you? What's your selection, and why did you choose it?
I'm actually very similar to Paul's, in that I just picked the first 6 songs on the album in the same order. So the only difference is I left off the Frayed Ends of Sanity. I had the first 6 songs, which comes in at 43 minutes, and I just thought these are the 6 best songs in the album. And I think with that, it's excellent, a really excellent album. And in terms of a rating, I would have that up. Okay. I don't think it's a 5 for me, but it'd be a 4.5.
So your songs were the first 6 songs, is that right?
Yeah, so Blackened and Justice for All, Eye of the Beholder, one.
And do you think part of the reason, same with Paul, you maybe didn't take the last 2 songs is just because of time constraints? And
I think so, because I don't think there's a bad song in this album. I just think there's some songs that are just too long, and so it's just a bit of trimming. But the ones I've left off are decent songs. I think these first 6 are the best songs.
And did you say 4.5?
Yeah.
So what's your selection, Brian, and why did you have that?
Yeah, well, my first one's Blackened, obviously. Great first song to start the album. Then I went for Harvester of Sorrow, which was the first single. I think the shortest song on the album as well, so change it up a bit. And then third was the title track, And Justice for All. Quite a long song as well. Then after that, we went for Shortest Straw. Good song. Quite you would call a shortest song for the album. And after that was Eye of the Beholder, which was a bit of a controversial choice, as we found there. Then Frayed Ends of Sanity, which I quite like that song with the wait. And the last song on the album for me to end it would have been One. I think it's a great song to finish on.
A bit like Mark.
I agree with that.
No, Mark had that as his closing.
But I would have,
great song to finish
looking
on.
at it now, I would have tried to adjust it to try and get Dyer's even there, I think. But but that's what it is at the moment.
And your version of the album, Brian, what rating would you give it?
I would keep it as a 4, like the original.
So mine would be, I think I talked about it in the previous podcast, was to say, And Justice for All would be the opening track, just because the way it sort of blends in, it starts off slowly and then it comes in, and it's the title track of the album, so I think it'd be a good opener. And then the second track would be Harvester of Sorrow because it's shorter than the others and it's really commercial. So I think building on that momentum from the first song. And then the third track I'd have one, so you've got the two big singles close to each other. And that would be side A. So it's actually 6 tracks, so that'd be side A. And then side B would start with Blackened, which is a great song. So although it's not starting the side A, it's starting side B. And the frayed ends of sanity would be the fifth track on the album. And the last song would be your favourite, To Live Is To Die. I just think that's a nice way to end the album, and I know it is a long song, but I thought, do you know what? Because they're long songs, have 3 songs on each side, and it's just a sign of the times. I think at that time, a lot of songs, a lot of the rock bands, the metal bands, it was all kind of, they were quite long songs, and on Metallica's next album, obviously it was more commercial, more kind of, the songs were much shorter, more commercial.
See, Shortest Straw's not on your list. Yeah.
Nope. It's
quite surprised by that.
I got the Shortest Straw. Yeah. Yeah, no, it's I think for me a lot of it was down to the time.
I think that was
because the songs were long. There was maybe some songs you didn't mind, but you just thought, well, for me to get them all on,
had to.
Like for example, To Live Is To Die, you could have probably got 2
had
songs.
To make ruthless decisions.
For that one song. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't necessarily that they were not good songs. It was just really to.
I'll let you off. I'll let you off there then.
So that was my reasoning. Thank you. And I would, out of 5, I would give mine 4. So I would put it up from a 3 to a 4. So we're now going to move on to talk about Metallica concerts. And we'll talk about Metallica live. So obviously, Brian and Stephen and Mark, you've seen them. And Paul, you haven't seen them, have you?
No, I haven't, but I do remember listening to them live in concert Radio 1 in the early 90s. And it was funny because in between songs, the language got a bit fruity. And the announcer would come in as soon as the song had finished, or try and come in as soon as the song finished. And so you're listening to Metallica live on Radio 1. In the background, you hear them all saying, "Yeah, mother, mother." Right. You can still hear them. It's been broadcast at like 7 p.m. Yeah. So anyone could have heard it. It was absolutely hilarious.
Should have had Steve's beat machine.
The one you're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you know the one you're talking about, Paul? I'm sure that's actually the Milton Keynes
might
concert.
Have been. It was 91, I think it was.
I'm 91.
Yeah, it might have been actually.
Ours was 93.
Because I remember
Milton Keynes,
93 it was, yeah. Because I remember they used to do quite a few concerts from Milton Keynes. They did Bon Jovi as well, and they were broadcast live. And like Nirvana Reading was live on Radio 1. So yeah, I think it was maybe the Milton Keynes.
It might have been, yeah. I just remember just trying to cover all the bad language and failing miserably.
We'd like to apologise for
that.
No,
they didn't apologise. They just
offended. like they do at football games as well, don't they? They do that. Sorry for
they
any
didn't apologise. They
you
just tried to cover it with the announcement. So you're listening to Radio 1, Metallica live. It's like, mother.
That's somebody old.
Yeah, no, King's your mother.
And what about, like, I've not seen them live either. But
I'm surprised. I thought you'd seen them, Paul.
I would like to have seen them around the. No, I haven't. No, I would like to have seen them around the era that the Milton Keynes show that Paul was just talking about, and the one you were at. I'd like to have seen them. For me, that was them at their peak.
Yeah.
For me. Anyway, so you guys have actually seen them. So Stephen and Brian, and so Mark, were you there at the same concert?
Yeah.
Into
Milton Keynes on the bus.
Yeah,
famous bus.
Because that was the week after the Guns N' Roses concert, Stephen, wasn't it?
Was
Yeah,
it?
because you went down to Milton Keynes 2 weekends in a
That's right.
row. Yeah.
It was, yeah.
That was
It was, yeah.
Was it
I was down
Saturday
at
and
Milton
Sunday?
Keynes
that was one
twice
of the
within the
reasons I didn't
space
go to
of
Guns N'
8
Roses,
days, I
actually. I
think.
think just because it was 2 weekends in a row.
Because you went to that as well, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
it's
it
some
was,
journey,
it was hard
yeah.
going getting the coach down to there and back 2 weekends in a
Oh, I
row.
think it was
That's,
longer
that's
with the
for
stops.
sure.
More
Yeah.
with the
That's,
stops.
how long does that take?
8
6
hours
hours
or something.
hours?
Yeah.
Depends
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're right.
Yeah, it was hard. Yeah, it was.
Depends
It
if you
was,
have to
it
go back
was
halfway
hard.
to pick up the tickets.
That's for sure. Hey, man.
Did you not have
for
to go
love
back?
of
The
music.
tickets
That's
got left
right,
in the
aye.
bar or something.
I remember that the organisers and stuff had to go back.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'd forgotten the money. No,
Aye.
I mean that was something else
That's
because
right. Remember?
Yeah.
it's like
of course.
was it the Black Bull pub? Yeah, so meet in the Black Bull pub at 8 in the morning. So of course you get there thinking you might well be first there, and you walk in, it's like a party going on. They've been there for hours, and they're absolutely hammered, and it's 8 in the morning, and then you get onto the bus, and they've all brought their drinks onto the bus, and we're sober. And I just remember, we're obviously the coach journey starts, and we're just leaving Edinburgh 10, 15 minutes into the journey. And the coach driver,
Jeff.
yeah, who's the organizer?
Big Tam.
I've still to be paid. And they're like, oh, that's whatever his name was.
Lying on the floor.
Jeff, it's Jeff. And like, oh, where is he? He went, he's the guy that looks like Dracula, who's unconscious in the middle of the floor, going up and down the gantry of the coach. I went, that's him. Have you got the money? Oh no, I've forgotten it. Travel all the way back to I think he lived straight in.
Did we not stop at
just
Pennycook
outside
as well?
Edinburgh, so we had to go back and get the money.
To get a carry out for the supermarket, they all jumped
That
out.
is the most drunken coach. Yeah.
Did it have a toilet on the bus?
Yeah.
Did it have a toilet? Because
like
that's some journey.
9 in the morning.
Yeah.
All right.
No, they didn't.
Oh.
Had to
Remember
stop
going back
at
home,
various
everybody was
times.
hungover, they were all just
That is
out
the
there. It
most
was quietest
drunken
journey
coach
ever going
I think
back
I've
home.
ever been on.
They were all done.
Different from
Aye.
the journey there.
That's right,
Nobody
Yeah.
moved on the coach trip back.
Yeah, and what about, sorry,
unconscious.
I'd sort of cut ahead a year there, but you actually
yeah,
first saw them in 92, and I remember that picking you up, stuck on the,
Oh, yeah, in
the
Glasgow.
motorway between Edinburgh and Glasgow. That's right.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, we broke down. I had my first ever car, which was
That's right, yeah.
and the CD player in it cost more than the actual car itself. I think the car cost me about £200. It was a mustard
It was
coloured
freezing, wasn't it?
Astra,
That's
and
right.
it was the world's worst car. It was awful. Yeah, there's no heating in it.
It had a lot of room in the back.
It was a shocking car.
I don't want
It
to know
was
about that,
terrible.
Mark. This
So
is a family show.
there was plenty of room in the back. Yeah. There was plenty of room, but it was a shocking car. I mean, what I remember about the car is that when you, especially in the winter, it was a manual choke, and you had to try and keep the car going or it would stall. And you've only got 2 feet, but you were having to try and use 3 pedals all at the same time to keep it going. Oh my goodness! And the brakes really didn't work on it either. So anyway, so you'll be unsurprised to hear that when we were driving through, it was Brian's sister Adele and me, we were driving through to the SAC in Glasgow to watch Metallica in '92. You'll never guess what happened. The car broke down. Who would have thought?
Coffee.
And thankfully,
the guy coffee maintenance guy, coffee machine maintenance guy.
Gave us a lift to the service station, which was nice.
Yeah.
And was it not a cold October night as well?
Yeah.
It's freezing.
That's right.
Yeah.
And I think
it was my dad.
It was cold. And I think, now, was it your...
It was my dad, yep.
No, it was either my dad or your dad came out.
We came and got the car.
Because I remember my dad saying he dropped us and he waited outside and he got his chips. And he says he could feel the car moving with the bass. Yes. the heaviness. Aye.
It
Exactly.
was
The
turned
bass
up
that
We're
was
that
making
night.
up for
Justice
it.
for All. They saved it up for the
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. They did make. I remember that the bass in that
We
concert
missed
being very loud.
we missed Enter
I
Sandman. It was the
think we
first
missed
song
the
as well. We
first
missed that.
song. Maybe we
Missed
only
the
maybe got in
intro
there. I think as they were playing "Sad But True,"
Did they?
but they played it again at the end. I'm sure they did. Yeah, I could be wrong about that. But yeah, it was a good show. But I was kind of spoiled a bit by you. You couldn't really relax, could you? Because you knew what had happened. You were late, and
Yes.
it kind of spoiled it a wee bit.
And
But a good show, nevertheless. And the nice, I was going to say the nice part, the end part to that was, went back to get my car that had broken down and
the thieves
been
left the
broken
car.
into, and the police had taken it away. And actually left the car. The only thing they took in
left
it,
the rest.
the only thing they took in it was the speakers. And I'm sure the fee I had to pay the police to get out that pound was more than what the car was worth. So yeah, that's my main memory of that concert, was just the car.
I know we'll get on. I know you saw them in 2017. We'll go on to that in a minute. But I was thinking about, you saw them 92, 93. What was the better one, and was there many differences because it was just a year apart?
93 was the better one, I would say. Think of the occasion as well, because we had like Megadeth supporting, and it was meant to be Alice in Chains, but they changed at the last minute. They pulled out, and the Almighty were supporting.
I know. I was really disappointed about that.
But
well,
yeah,
we both love Alice in
just
Chains,
great, the whole
and we're
sort
really
of
looking
like
forward to seeing
festival
them again.
and
Yeah.
outdoor and that. Yeah, and we also got to see the whole concert, which was much better than 92. Exactly, yeah.
You wisely didn't take your car down to Milton Keynes.
Yeah, we were there nice and early. I enjoyed it. No, that one, it was just a good day out. The set, I think the set list was really very similar and everything. It's still very much the same show, but yeah, we've seen it all. It was just a real party atmosphere.
Yeah.
And good weather and all.
I don't think
it
you
was
can
a really good day out. So that was my
And
favourite.
Mark, how was it for you, Mark? I'm just aware, Mark.
I was just going to say that I don't think you can ask for a better support act for Metallica than Megadeth, which is such a great thing.
I know,
yeah. And did they get on? Because I know for a while, because obviously Dave Mustaine used to be in the band, didn't he? He used to be in Metallica.
Yeah, I think Dave Mustaine falls out with everyone, doesn't he?
Did he get on now anyway?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's. Did Dave Mustaine not have like a cancer scare recently? Mouth cancer.
Throat cancer. Yeah.
Throat cancer. Yeah.
But he's seemingly all clear now.
I think so. Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah, I think that there was history there because obviously Dave Mustaine, who's kind of the main person in Megadeth, was in Metallica, and now, did he leave of his own accord, or was he forced out? I can't quite remember. Right, okay, so there was history there, and I think there was a bit of animosity, and this was why it was such a big concert, because it was seen as very much
and two bands at their peak,
arguably, makeup
you know?
type thing. Yeah, but the funny thing was, coincidental or not, the sound for the Megadeth set was turned way too low. Yes, I remember that vividly. And then, of course, by the time Metallica came on, the volume was up to the required level. So, what about the time you saw them in 2008, Mark?
It was at the O2 in London.
I actually didn't remember that.
It was £5 as well.
2008 or something?
They had two gigs, I think, one in Hamburg and one in London, where they announced them really late, and they said members of the fan club can get tickets for £5, but to join the fan club was free. So basically, anyone could get a ticket for £5, and it was brilliant. Yeah, it's really good. Even though I don't really know much of this stuff after the Black album. But they played a real mixture of stuff. They even played stuff off Kill 'Em All, which was brilliant. They played Whiplash in an encore. which is another of my favourites. Can we have that on this instead of Dyer's Eve? But that was it was really good actually. The O2 is actually a pretty decent place to see bands, even though it's quite big. But they were really good. They played for hours, and it wasn't like some sort of, here's a 15-minute drum solo sort of thing. It was just like, here's all the songs at the right length, and we're doing loads of them. It was just proper, like, here's some good music. We're all enjoying ourselves. Let's have a good time.
Yeah.
I've still never seen a concert in O2. I've watched
a Star Wars
tennis
exhibition,
tournament
wasn't it?
there. I've been to a Star Wars exhibition there. Still never seen a concert
we saw
there.
one there.
It was excellent. Yeah.
Out of all the gigs that you saw Metallica,
Really
what was the favourite one? Because I know you guys are saying Milton Keynes. Would you agree with that, Mark?
I probably wouldn't actually, because I like indoor venues basically. So probably that would be what would swing it. I just feel like it's more intense and better atmosphere. So I would go with the O2, even though it's a big indoor venue. I think it benefits from being under the roof. So I'll go for that, but it's close.
Yeah, so we've seen them at the Glasgow Hydro in 2017. Me and Brian went through for that one, and yeah, it was a great show. Really, really good. I think the in a lot of ways one of the best parts of it is they were obviously touring the Hardwired to Self-Destruct album, which for me is by far and away their best album since the Black Album. So they were touring that. So they were touring a really good album. So you got a lot of that. You got really the best stuff from that, plus the kind of best from throughout their career. So yeah, really good show, really good stage show. They played for quite a while as well, and yeah, excellent. Really, really good show. And like Mark says, just nice being indoors.
And was it funny seeing them again after? Because obviously it was 93 and then 2017 is a big gap. And obviously Jason Newsted's not in the band anymore, the bassist. Yeah.
No, and I think the thing that came through for me, you could just tell they were since the last time, they're just a much more mature band, which is not unsurprising since it's 20 years plus on. Just obviously they're more grown up there, and I think we were talking. Paul was mentioning a lot about the swearing and so on, and I don't really remember them swearing during the concert. It was definitely toned down. But yeah, really good show, really good selection of tracks.
So Metallica in the future, we've kind of talked about it already, actually, and so they released their first album back in 1983, and they reached their commercial and creative peak in 91. And this is one of the questions we usually ask on the podcast, particularly albums that were like massive and part of that period. Do you ever think they'll hit the heights again of the Black Album? And what did you think of their last album, Hardwired to Self-Destruct? So putting it out there to Mark, maybe, do you think they'll ever hit the heights of the Black Album?
I think it's unlikely, but I just got to be honest and say I don't really know how good their stuff after that is, because I've never really got into it, which I think makes me think that I don't think it's that good. But I haven't, to be honest, I haven't heard that much of it really properly, because I kind of felt like I'd lost them a bit, because they'd. How long ago after the Black Album was it they brought out the next one? Was it quite a while?
I think it was 96. So you're talking,
I guess we just
5 years.
That time. 5 years.
What time 5 years or something, yeah.
It's a long time at that time, wasn't it?
Yeah. So, kind of lost touch with them a bit and just drifted apart. So I don't really know about the recent stuff. And yeah, I just feel like, for me, Metallica were that sort of 10-year period at the start of their career. That's my Metallica world. Really.
Yeah. And what about you, Paul? Do you think they'll ever reach that height again?
I'm Black Album did? Same as Mark. Actually, I'm not all that familiar with the work after the Black Album. I've got Death Magnetic, and that's actually quite thrash metal. It's more back to the original, back to the roots. It's very heavy. But for the other albums, I've never listened to them. And from Death Magnetic, I mean, it's okay, but it's not quite as good as their first 5 albums. And I don't think they'll ever reach the peak of those first 5 albums. I think the best album is Master of Puppets. That's just an absolute classic. And I think it'll be very difficult for them to reach the heights of that album. So, yeah, I'm not all that familiar with the work after the Black Album.
Yeah, there is that thing, isn't there, when someone releases such a massive album, it's very much of the time, isn't it? It's hard to see that ever being repeated. And what about you, Stephen?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I think they had a near 10-year period where it's, I think critically and commercially they were getting it right and built up to that peak in '91. And I think in a lot of ways, by their own admission, they've drifted a bit since then. And I really think the last album, Hardwired Self-Destruct, was a very conscious effort to get back in the zone and make themselves relevant again. And by and large, I think they did that. And I would say to both Paul and Mark, that the first disc of the latest album, although it's a few years old now, the first disc of that is the best thing they've done since the Black Album. And it's actually a shame we're talking about And Justice for All being too long. The latest album's too long, and it's a shame because if they'd just stuck with that first disc of songs and maybe the 2 best songs from the second disc, it's up there for me. It's up there with that, those classic recordings from the 80s and early 90s. So do I think they'll hit the heights of the likes of the Black Album again? Probably not. However, I think they actually came pretty damn close with their latest album, and with a bit of prudent editing, then they might have had something there that could rival the best of their stuff.
Thanks, yeah.
Check it out, guys. It's worth it. It's a really, really strong album.
Yeah, for me, I only really know Injustice for All in the Black Album, although I do know some of the, like Master of Puppets and Ride the Lightning. I know some of them, but I'm not that knowledgeable about them. But for me, I remember I bought the CD single for the first song off the album, for the Load album, I think it was. And for me, it kind of felt like a lot had changed in those 5 years because grunge had came in and fashions had changed, and it just felt like, I don't know, the music that they were bringing out just wasn't relevant anymore, or I didn't enjoy it as much. And so for me, I wouldn't really be interested in listening to their new stuff. I don't know, I kind of think, that's, that they reached their peak, and I don't know if I'd really be interested in listening to the new stuff. But
I think it's funny how we've talked about the length of the songs on Injustice for All, and yes, they're long, but if you look at the other albums, the songs are pretty long as well. Especially in the Black Album, a lot of the songs are 5 minutes plus. And Master of Puppets, there's I think it's 8 songs on the album, if I remember correctly. Maybe 8 or 10 songs. And they're all well over 5 minutes. Some even approaching 9 minutes. So I think it's just a feature of Metallica. The songs are long in general. So I don't think, I think maybe Injustice for All is probably longer than most, I suppose. But I think it's a feature of Metallica that the songs are long ones. And it sounds like they're having a big jamming session on a lot of them. But a lot of them are very, very clever songs as well. It's not just head-banging music, it's actually, there's a lot of skill in the music.
Enter Sandman is one of the, if not the greatest riff ever. I just think it's such an amazing
I think
riff.
the intro to Master of Puppets, the song, is just magic. It really is brilliant. And then there's another song, Orion, the other is instrumental. I think it's just absolute genius as well.
Okay.
Yeah, Orion's a good instrumental. very good, and it's not too long.
Yeah, it's about 7 minutes, I think.
Yeah, nice and short. Yeah.
That's short for Metallica, though. So, in conclusion, then, guys, what are your parting thoughts then, thinking about the album?
I think it's a good album. I think it's maybe a bit too long. Could have done with a bit of trimming,
Mhm.
bit of better. Could have done with better production. Maybe
Mhm.
obviously a bit more bass as well. You could actually hear the bass. But yeah, I think overall it is a good album.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think some of the best songs are on it. I think it's but the bass and the production, the lack of bass and the overproduction are big issues for me. And I think if those had been sorted out, I think it might be remembered as the best album.
I did read somewhere that the bass wasn't turned down, is that the other parts were turned up because the rears were shot after the tour, all the concerts they did. So they maxed up all the other parts and drowned out the bass.
Well, I think that's a good reason for it.
Yeah, I read that.
Has it been playing too loud? At least that's a good reason.
Yeah, I mean the turning down of the bass was very much came from James Hetfield and Lars Ulrich. So take from that what you will. For me, I've actually really enjoyed revisiting this album because it's not one that I ever owned. It's only one that I ever heard when visiting friends. And I hadn't listened to it since the late 80s. So just over the last month or so, I've really enjoyed listening to it and getting to know it really properly for the first time. And yeah, I think it's a really good album. Really enjoyed it. I've taken the plunge and bought the double vinyl reissue of it, which ironically arrived just as we started the podcast tonight. And courtesy of Amazon. I will add that I did have to pay Amazon to get it, but if Amazon wants to send me free vinyl copies of all the albums that we do on these podcasts, then please feel free to do so.
And it does possibly have the best song ever on it as well.
A journey worth taking.
Yeah,
really enjoyed it.
No, that's great. Thanks for coming in, guys. It's great, and we'll hopefully maybe get you back for another podcast, another one of our shows, one of the albums that we do. And our next podcast, next show, we're going to be focusing on Paul McCartney's Flaming Pie album from 1997.
No difference, Paul, from Metallica.
You can listen to all
Paul
our
McCartney
show on all the major podcast providers, including Apple, Google, and Spotify. And please give us some 5-star reviews and positive feedback. That would be much appreciated, if that's what you think. And we're on YouTube. And if you could like and subscribe to our channel, check us out on Facebook and Instagram. You can leave us voicemail via Anchor. You can email us at trimthemusicfat@gmail.com, or you can check out our website at www.trimmingthemusicalfat.com. So until next time, thanks for listening.
Goodbye.